Okay, so welcome back. We're going to talk about blueprints today. So I'm currently in my first person template project that I opened up and created last time. But what I did is just deleted everything inside of it. We're not going to need any of the stuff that's in there, and this just gives a nice clean open area. What I'm going to do is dive into a blueprint now. So I want to just kind of give a quick rundown of what a blueprint is, how to make one, where to find them, all that stuff. So before we get into any kind of coding stuff, I do just want to explain some basics on blueprint stuff. So what I'm going to do is find my content browser. And if we don't have our content browser, I'm going to close mine. So right now, this editor is the only window I have open. So if I go to window and I go to content browser, you can have up to 4 of them open. So if I click one, it's going to open it. Now, by default, usually it's just in its own window, but you can dock it if you prefer to work that way. So now I have my editor window here. I have my content browser, which shows me everything in my project here. And this is just kind of the way that I'm going to work here. What I want to do is just go to the first person character blueprint. So we're going to find that by going into first person blueprints, BP first person character. So this is going to be the blueprint for our first person character that's in here. So if I double click to open that up, so you can see in here, we have some code already. Now this is for camera input, movement, and we have a jump here. So this is what they give you as part of the template. I'm just going to leave all this stuff here. Later on, we'll be changing our character and adding stuff in here, and we'll be doing some different things. But for now, we're just going to leave that the way it is. So you can see when we open this, we have a event graph and a viewport. So I'm just going to go through the viewport first. So if we go there, that's going to show what our blueprint is made up of in terms of what meshes we're using, what collision we're using. So anything in this column here, these are all components. So we have the blueprint that we're in at the top. This is our BP first person character. And then everything under here is attached to this blueprint. So the first thing we have is our capsule component. So this is going to stop us from going through the ground, going through walls. This is going to collide with everything in the world. And if you click on your capsule component, it'll give you different options and things that are available here. Next, they give us an arrow. So this arrow is just going to show us where forward is. So we do want to make sure that we're aligned that way with our camera. And you don't have to worry about any of this starting out, but that is what that arrow is for, just to show you what forward is there. And then we have our skeletal mesh. So in this particular situation, this skeletal mesh is not being used. This would typically be for the character. Whenever you create a character blueprint, it's going to give you a default skeletal mesh, and that's typically for your character. In this case, we don't have a character, we just have arms. You can see here when I highlight the skeletal mesh, if we come over here, it's saying that we're not using any skeletal mesh asset for that. So we're not using that skeletal mesh, but it is here by default. So next we have the first person camera here. So you can see if I click on the camera highlights and shows us where it is. We could move it around if we want to, and we have different settings here. So we can change field of view. We can change where the camera is. There's a lot of options for different things regarding movement, how you want the camera to react, stuff like that. It shows us what camera mesh we're using. And then we have another skeletal mesh here under the camera. So this is going to be the arms. You can see that they select when I select it. And then if we go to our mesh part of it, it shows what mesh we're using. We're using this SK mannequin arm mesh. And then the materials that are associated with that mesh are right here as well. So if you want to go in and see what materials it is, you can click the little magnifying glass, and that will bring you right to the material that the arms are using. So if you wanted to change the material in any way, it takes you right there to show you what material that is, and it also shows you where it is in your folder list here. Okay, so these are all components that get added to this blueprint. And then we have down here, we have a character movement component. So it says in the bottom there for mobility non-scene component. So this is basically something that, you know, you can't see in your scene, basically. This is more of like a coding type component. So the character movement component, if you go in, there's no physical skeletal mesh that you assign. There's no materials. This is a component that's made to give the character movement. So you have stuff like your gravity, you have your movement speed, you have jumping, and we have our max walk speed here. So we could just change that from 600 down to 300 or whatever you want for a walk speed. So there's anything related to the character movement is going to be in this character movement component. So if you need to add something here, you can click the add, and then you can add stuff like if you need a plane, if you need a cube, a sphere, maybe you want to add a static mesh. You can add a static mesh to this, and right now it's not going to have anything, but if you select your static mesh and you come over here, this is where you can tell it what static mesh you want to add. So you can go through search, do whatever, and add a static mesh into that. I'm not going to do that right now. So you can add different components this way. And this is how you're going to add any type of a collision. So if you wanted to add a different type of collision to this, you can add a, let's say, a sphere collision. So now I have a second collision on my character, and this is a sphere collision. We can make that whatever size we want and go into its collision settings and change that for whatever we want to do, which I'm not going to do here. That's going to be a whole separate video that I'm going to do. This is how you would add components to your blueprint here. And you can search for things. So if you're looking for something like a light, maybe you have a point light here. So if you wanted to put some sort of a light on your player, you could use this to do that. Put it where you want. If you just needed light, a little bit of like floodlight around your player, maybe it's a night scene or something like that, you can put a light over your character, adjust the intensity and all that stuff here. But the light itself would be a component. And if there's anything that you're trying to adjust on a specific component, you want to click that component and then you get the options available to it. So then under that, we have a section called My Blueprint. And you're going to see that we have our event graph here. We have functions here, we have variables here. And if you have any interfaces set up, you'll have a tab for interfaces. If you accidentally close the event graph, you can just double click it right here and that will reopen it, redock it. Now you can add new event graphs. I'm not going to go into that in this tutorial, but you can add new event graphs. I'm going to delete that. If you want to make a new function for something, you can add a new function. And then now we have our new function. It gives us a tab right here. So as we're working in our event graph, we can quickly go to that function and do whatever we're doing in there. Close that out when you're done, and then you have your new function right here. You can add new variables too, so you just give them a name, select what type of a variable you want, and then you have your new variable to use in your blueprint. I'm going to be going over variables in the next video, so I'm not going to be explaining anything about that now. I just want to talk about the window, what you're going to see when you're in a blueprint, what the components were. And as you can see here, if I compile this, we have a little star next to our blueprint up here. That means it's unsaved. And you can also tell that by down here. It says we have one unsaved file. If I open that, it says it's BP first person character. So I can click save selected here if I want to save it. I can click save up here. There's lots of different ways to save it, but you'll see when I click save, that little star went away. So if you see a star up there, that's what it means. It just means that there's something unsaved in there. I'm going to go back into the blueprints folder. The last thing I just want to show here is how to just create a new blueprint. So if we just right click in here, we can create a blueprint class. So I'm not going to go into, again, what all the differences are, but if you want to make a character blueprint, you would want to start with the character. If you want to just make an actor blueprint, something that's going to be in your world, you can make an actor. We'll go into this at a later point, but let's just click actor for now. It's going to ask us to name it. So if I just name that my test actor BP, we can now open that up. So you can see that we just open this test actor up and there's nothing in here. So if we go to event graph, they give us a few nodes that we can start with. There's nothing in our components tab except a default scene root. So you have to have something as a default in here. So they give you a default scene, which is just some sort of a start for when you're adding stuff. Now, sometimes you may want to replace that with whatever you're doing, but if you wanted to add a cube in here, you can see how the cube gets parented to the default scene root. So the default scene root doesn't have a lot of options. You can drag your cube up and make that the new default scene root, and now everything will be parented to the cube. So it really depends how you want to set up your blueprint. For a lot of cases, you can just leave the default scene root as the scene component that they give you and then start putting in things. So for example, if I wanted to add a sphere to this now, so my sphere is now parented to my cube, which means if I move my cube, my sphere is going to move with it. Now, if I didn't want that to be parented, you can just drag that mesh up onto the default scene root, and it's going to ask me, do I want to make it the new root or just attach it? So if I just tell it, let's just attach it, now that sphere is no longer parented to my cube. So they're going to move independently from each other now, but they're both parented to the default scene root. We'll add a sphere collision. So if we wanted to parent that sphere collision we just made to our sphere, we can just drag it right on top, and you can see now it becomes a child of that sphere. So now if I wanted to, I could move that sphere collision over to my sphere. We could scale it up so we can see it. And then now when I move my sphere around, the sphere collision is going to move with it because it's parented to that. So these are just a few things to know how this stuff kind of works. There may be situations where you want everything parented to one object, or you may want different static meshes or collisions separate. That's going to just depend on what you're doing, but just be aware that sometimes whatever you have clicked, it's going to add to that. So if I just accidentally have my cube clicked and say I want to put a light in here, we'll just pick a point light. Because I had my cube selected, it put the point light under my cube. So now that point light is parented to my cube. So wherever my cube goes, that point light is going to go. So if I select my point light and just move it so we can see it, now wherever I move my cube, my point light's going to follow. So just be aware of that. If you are adding collision or meshes to this, whatever you have selected, it's going to put it in there as a child of that object. But you can always just drag and reorder this. So if I didn't want the point light on the cube, again, I can drag it to the default scene root and just click attach. And then we're back to having the cube, sphere, and point light all separate now, but our sphere collision is still attached to our sphere. So that's just a quick rundown of how to create a new blueprint and just a little bit about how to add different components into the blueprint and just about attaching them to any other components in here or not. We can compile, save that. So then in order for us to use this blueprint, it would have to be in our world. So if we come back to our editor, I can do Control and Spacebar, which will bring up our content drawer here. We can go into where we had the blueprint. Here's the test actor. So now if I drag that out into the world, here is the blueprint that we just made. So now we got some stuff going through the ground because I was changing heights on everything. And if you did have to adjust anything, I can go into the blueprint here, and then you can move stuff like this and actually see what's going on. So if I wanted to move that cube up, I can just move it like that and see what's going on. I can move the sphere up as well. So now whenever we put that blueprint in the world, that's going to be the new height that our static meshes will be at. So I think that's going to be it for this time. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.